Hi, Rachel.
Hi,
It's great to see you.
you
I'm
too.
glad we can have these conversations.
I noticed that we're both wearing red.
Yes, that's a coincidence.
It is. It just shows that we're connected on a deeper level.
Spiritual level, a romantic level, a level of love, I think. Red is like a symbol of love.
Yeah,
And
I guess.
that's good. That gives us a kind of energy for exploring things together so we can get to truth because love leads to truth.
So I think we were going to talk about an interesting topic related to truth.
Yeah, well, you were saying to me in the kitchen just now, you said, what do you do when experts disagree? Right? That was like the question. Then you started to share something. I was like, wait, Rachel, hold on. This is a great topic because this is something I'm thinking a lot about. So I want to hear what you were going to say about that.
So I remember years ago, and we were talking with Nathan Ballantyne. Remember?
A professional epistemologist.
Yes, we were talking with him, or like we were talking kind of like, I guess it's like, I mean, we even went to Sioux Plantation with Nathan
Yeah.
Ballantyne and JP Moreland, didn't we?
Yes. Yeah. Those I think
Yeah.
were separate events, but yeah. Yeah.
I
Soup
thought
plantation.
there was one where we were like actually just like four of us together. Or maybe it was somebody else. Maybe I'm mixing things together. But
I don't remember.
so anyway, I just remember that, he was doing work on disagreement.
Yep.
And I don't want to minimize Nathan's work. So I mean, I haven't actually read all of his
You
works.
don't know his work.
I don't know his work. So
He's an expert on
it
disagreement.
would be
Are you
interesting.
going to say that you disagree with his
No,
work on disagreement?
no, I'm
All
not. I
right.
don't want to minimize or step over his work
Yeah.
because this is related to the conversation that we're having right now, which is what do you do when experts have different ideas about things? And if you
Yeah.
consider, if you consider Nathan to be an expert
He is.
on
Yeah.
disagreement, then what do you do if you disagree with some
Well,
disagreement?
the experts themselves disagree about how to think about disagreement.
Yeah. So that
Yeah.
it's just an interesting idea. I mean, I don't even know. I don't know what his particular views are. I mean, more than like what we had in person years ago. So I haven't been following his work, but I was just thinking that that was kind of interesting because yeah, you can disagree about what to do when people disagree. So
So you were. I think you had a story or you had something about
yeah,
this.
so okay, so anyway, I was just having this thought and I was wondering what you were thinking, what you would think about this.
Yeah.
So this thought that I was having was that um the like why would it matter if somebody's disagreeing? Why would it really matter? Like especially let's just say that uh you're looking into let's just pick a topic. Let's say you're looking into whether the Bible is the inspired word of God,
Okay.
right?
I thought you were going to say you're looking into whether the past could be infinite
Okay, we can
because that
that
was on my
example.
mind.
Okay, but the example I just brought up is
Yeah.
perhaps going to illustrate my point a little more.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Go for it.
so you're going to look into, and by the way, it's 111. So that's just
What does that mean? It's only 109 over here.
that's a different
You
discussion.
always see that. You always see the clocks when they have
That's
these synchronicities. How come I never see that? That doesn't make. That's not even fair.
not fair. So anyway, that's a different discussion. But so whether the Bible is the inspired word of God
Hmm.
is a question that some people look into and then they become experts on that question.
Yeah.
And then they disagree over that um, question, like how to interpret it, like what
Yeah.
the answer is, like all the nuance behind it. There's disagreement there. So I was going to say, so what does it matter to you? What does it matter if people
Yeah.
just
For me,
yeah
it. Are you asking?
Yeah, I am. I am.
Well, so I mean, for me, it would matter because if I want to figure out if that the answer to the question, whatever it is, and if I'm not an expert and the experts disagree, that I'm sort of lost at sea. I mean, this was kind of Nathan's point in his work. He was pointing out that kind of like every significant question that anybody ever asks is a question about something that the experts disagree on. And the question you just asked is one where people who look into these things from different angles will come away with different views. And so then the reason why I would care about that, the reason I'd be interested is that I'd be trying to figure, okay, well, how do I find out what's true? And if the way that I have to get to the truth is by figuring out what the experts think, then either I have to be an expert myself or I'm just lost at sea. But I can't be an expert about everything. And then if I do become an expert, that doesn't even solve the problem because that just means that I'm one of the disagreeing experts. So why should I privilege my view as an expert over other experts? Those are some
Yeah.
of the
So,
pain
um,
points for me.
so it's interesting, right? So what you said was it is when you like the reason it would matter to you is because you want to actually find out what's true. Well, why would you want to find out what's true?
That's a presupposition right there. I just love the truth. I don't have an argument for the value of finding the truth. I find myself drawn, just like
Yes.
I'm
Okay.
drawn to you. I'm drawn
But
to you, Rachel. I'm drawn to the truth. It's sort of similar in that way.
okay. Okay. I get it. I get it.
You get that?
I get it. I get it. But
Some
I
things are just
also,
self-evidently attractive, and the truth is one of them. You just want it, and it's
okay.
and then it's hard to get, right? I mean, that's one of
Yes.
those treasures.
Okay. So I do know you well enough though to know
Mm.
that there are certain truths that are more attractive to you than other truths.
Just like there's some people that are more attractive. Like
Apparently.
you're the most attractive of all the people that I've seen personally. Okay,
So
I don't want to distract you. Keep keep going. I don't know what the audience thinks about this. You're like, I haven't seen this side of Josh. Here I am. This is the real me.
okay. So remember that discussion we were having about people seeing you from the outside and then you see
Yeah,
yourself from the inside and how it can sometimes feel different. That's
yeah,
that's one of those experiences going on right now.
yeah.
For
People
your
who see me from the outside according to certain form,
That's right.
now they're seeing a different form.
Okay, sorry. We
Yeah,
digress.
yeah, yeah,
Okay, so for example, I think that probably the truth about some historical figure, whether they really were the heir to the dynasty, in ancient China, or whether someone, like just erased all of the records in the books and burned all the books in piles and made it look like their dynasty like was inherited from the gods or something. Like, I don't know. I'm just going to make up a story. Like that sort of an inquiry, like what's the truth of that matter?
yeah,
It doesn't, from my experience of you, that
yeah,
truth, that sort of a truth isn't attracting you like a magnet.
yeah. Some truths I don't really care about so much.
So I am just curious then. So, like, what sort of a truth, or what would be some of the attributes of the truths that would draw you like a magnet?
It seems like maybe there's two classes. So one would be truths that are kind of relevant practically to my life. So, if we're trying to figure out, should we purchase something? Okay. We were looking at computers yesterday. Should we get our kids a new computer? And so we were trying to get truth about the prices and about the types of computers. And I cared about that because it would sort of affect our lives and our kids' lives. So that's one class. And then another class, which is, I guess, maybe why I'm a philosopher, but it's just like truths that are kind of like the most fundamental and the farthest reaching. So like, what is the age of reality? How old is reality? Right? Like, what is everything made out of? And I just find those questions to be interesting. And then within those two classes, I'm probably hyper interested in the intersection between those. So the most fundamental truths that then have kind of the biggest impact on how I live. Like truths about the value of people. We talk about this. What makes people valuable? That's relevant to relationships. That's relevant to how I treat people.
Yeah, so interesting
Is that a
because
good answer?
that's a good answer. I think that that's a very
You're
accurate answer.
grading me. Accurate.
No,
It's
I'm
a
not
true answer.
grading you. I'm actually just wondering what attributes you would draw out there. That does seem accurate to me. But I'm just interested in
Accurate to describing your
to
sense of who
describing
I am.
yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and I was just wondering if there's this other thing. It seems like there's this other motivation for finding out what's true and then really being animated over this question
Yeah.
about when experts disagree. And I think that that motivation has to do with something more along the lines of um, feeling relationally safe. Now
Mm-hmm.
you might start to use the word tribalism, but I'm not going to use that in a negative term, if I even use that term at all. I'm not going to use that
Mm-hmm.
negatively, because what I'm really trying to point at is actually an authority structure.
Yeah.
When there's an authority structure,
You feel
you say,
safe.
I identify with that authority structure. Oh,
Yeah.
so do I. And then there's a feeling of safety because
Yeah.
we're like part of the same group or part of the same camp. Like we can at least have some common ground. Like, for example, if you say, oh, I'm a Christian, and then that means, oh, okay, you probably believe that the Bible is the word of God. Oh, yeah, I do. And then it's like, oh, somebody says, well, I'm a Christian and I don't believe the Bible is the word of God. And then these two over here say, oh, well, they're not really a Christian. Watch out for them, right?
Yeah. You're dangerous.
Because they're dangerous.
Wolf in sheep's clothing would be
Because the
yeah,
reason for that is because people find some
safety.
safety
Yeah.
in having others who are more similar to them, or like that and I would say that that sort of a reliance is something that we can all depend on in a certain degree, but that some would depend upon more than others,
Yeah.
definitely within certain types of topics. So, like, for example, in the topics related to worldview, maybe there are a lot of people who they're not philosopher types. And so they would very much rely upon the authority structure in the tribe that they're associating with to answer their worldview questions.
Yeah.
So they know that another person in their tribe is safe, like they have the same worldview as they do.
So then when experts disagree, one kind of answer would be, let me find the experts that I consider trustworthy, the ones that make me feel safe, let's say.
Yeah.
Is that kind of where you're going to go with that?
Well, that's what I was just then going to say, like, okay, so like let's just then think about this. So why would people be so animated about what to do when the experts disagree? Well, it seems like either it's because they're trying to find safety in which authority structure to believe, or they're trying to actually find out what's true, but that's
Mm-hmm.
independent of the
Oh,
authority.
yeah.
Okay, so those are actually,
That's a good distinction there.
yeah,
Yes.
those are two different motivations
That you
for,
you might not be trying to get to the truth. I mean, you could have multiple motivations, but it could be that you are looking for a feeling of safety, especially if you have a lot of voices saying, don't go over there. Those are dangerous. They might have degrees by their name. They might be called experts according to their followers, right? But they're dangerous. And so you don't go over there because your experts kind of make you feel safe, I think is that. And you're not even trying to say this is a negative thing. You're just saying this is a human
I'm
thing.
just,
We
yeah, I'm
find
just trying
ourselves
to
in
observe.
communities, like we can all relate to this. We have
We can
different
all relate.
experts that we sort of associate with. And sometimes there's a feeling of safety so that when experts disagree, the reason we would even care is not even just that there's a crisis of truth or something, that's part of it, but that there's also a question of safety. Where do I
Yeah, I think
belong?
so. So like I think that here's one way that this might actually apply to you, even if you're really just attracted to the truth like a magnet, right? Okay, so you could say, well, then I'm just completely, immune to the motivation of seeking, what's true based upon an authority structure. Like, it's like, well, what if you actually find safety and security among others who are actually critical thinkers and like
Hmm.
they're kind of philosophical types, and that they've
Yeah.
thought through something very carefully, right? And then you would actually tend to trust those people who would come to an opinion and be an expert on something. You would tend to trust those people maybe more than some other person who, let's just say that they're not philosophically inclined. Let's say that they're more along the lines of maybe they're an activist, or maybe they're a mystic, or maybe they're someone who, like there's somebody who does something in a different domain, right? And they're
Yeah.
using a different skill set, right?
And their
And it's like
motivational structure seems to be more
maybe they're in business and they've figured
to
out the
advertise
right
something.
business model. Like they figure out
Yeah.
what sells, right? And then it's like, well,
Yeah.
maybe you have less trust um from those experts, from those people who are sort of rising to the top as experts in the field. Maybe you have less trust because they're not sharing the similar core values that you would
Hmm.
perceive others sharing with you. And so then that would be one thing where it's like it might not even be so explicitly that you even are so distraught over like, oh, like these experts disagree, like what should I do? It's like,
Right.
well, no, it's more of a done deal. It's like, oh, okay, well, actually I don't even consider this a debate because the experts that I adhere to say this, and there are others who sort of claim expertise in these areas, but I just see through that, like they're not really experts because they're going on these, core values instead, right? And
I can
so,
relate to that. I maybe would intuitively feel kind of like more aligned with those who kind of want to see it for themselves.
mhm,
Um, but it's interesting because you just mentioned that maybe let's say there are people who are trying to see things for themselves, and then some of them become experts, and then I might trust what they say more than what somebody else is saying who's really good at packaging ideas and maybe presenting them.
right, right, right.
And I don't even know if that's even true about me, because I think maybe to a fault, I want to see it for myself. Uh, and it doesn't matter if other people who want to see it for themselves tell me what they see. I want to see it for myself. And I started to tell you this morning, I was reading an article, a very technical article, a philosophy article this morning, early in the morning. It was windy. It was 3 a.m. The wind woke me up. So, what am I going to do? Just pull up a philosophy article, sort of therapeutic to my mind. And it was on this question that we were talking about last time about the possibility of an infinite series. But it was a very technical article, and it had these definitions and then theorems and these proofs. And it was very interesting, Rachel, because while I was reading the article, there was a point where it was like I felt like I had a choice between just trusting the authority of their deduction and then like seeing it for myself. I felt like I had that choice. And I just like wanted to see it for myself. And there were a few terms I looked up, and then I saw for myself like what he was saying. And it was so interesting because I detected in that article I would say a philosophically substantive premise that it felt to me was kind of disguised by the symbolism.
Mhm.
It was sort of like skated over. And so if others picked up that article, and let's say it wasn't on a controversial philosophical topic, it seems like anything that's on a controversial philosophical topic will always invite the critics and the skeptics, so that if there's any place to question, that place will be found. But let's say that it's not on that topic, then it sort of carries its authority. And if I'm not looking at it for myself, then I might just not see the substantive premise that's in there. In this case, it was a premise that I thought would require more support for me to see that it would be true. And it wasn't that I didn't think it could be supported. It was just that I didn't see nothing in the symbolism verified the premise, but the symbolism carried authority. And I didn't want to just believe it based on authority or based on symbolism. I mean, this is why I don't even want to believe. I mean, you've heard me talk about the foundations of math, and there are systems where you can deduce certain theorems, and it's like, okay, well, that's true given those axioms. Well, I think those axioms are true. Maybe this set of axioms over here is closer to the truth. Or yeah,
So let me re-spin the
spin
scenario
this.
a little bit, because I think that what you're saying is actually true, that you would always want to see something for yourself. But let's do something a little bit more interesting, which is like in a snap.
That's not interesting.
Well,
I'm just teasing. No, I get it, because it doesn't really answer the question,
it
because
doesn't really answer the question.
if
So
you're not seeing it for yourself and experts
if you're
disagree,
not seeing it for yourself, and let's just say like this has happened to you, that you have an injury and you go to the doctor's office, and here's the doctor tells you very confidently, you need to do this, or this is the case. So then what do you do? How do you feel internally? How do you respond to that?
I feel rebellious. I don't know. How do you feel?
Well, it's interesting because I mean, I think that that's something where I have personally changed over time, because I feel like I would discover that there's this automatic instinct because someone's saying something very authoritatively, and it's like, oh, well, they're an expert. Like, I guess I should just listen to them. But what I've discovered is that there are so many times when I've just listened to what an expert has said.
Yeah.
And it's actually turned out to either be completely wrong, or like it goes against my intuition tells me this is probably what I should do, and then I end up doing what they told me to do anyway. And then it's like somehow like I just discovered that if I would have just gone with my intuition, that would have been the right thing to do.
Yeah. Or you find out that the reason they have their belief isn't evidence that's in some ways weightier than your evidence. It's
Well,
rather that they have their belief because it was handed to them by authority.
so that's
At least
the thing
this is one
very
experience.
tricky, right? So that's the thing that's very tricky, because what makes someone an expert, and what are they an expert in?
Yeah.
Because, for example, someone could be an expert as in they have spent lots of years studying particular things. Now, leave the particular undefined right now, because we actually don't know what they studied. They studied particular things. They went into particular labs. They did particular trainings, and then they had particular experiences, right? And so, like, if there's this feeling like there's someone who's an expert in this whole big sphere of thinking, or practice, whatever it is, this whole realm of service, and let's just say that I come in and now let's just say that I have a certain intuition about something. So first of all, there's someone who claims to be an expert, but how do I know that they're an expert? And what are they an expert on? Because I think that there's oftentimes this overreach. It's like, well, yeah, like, okay, maybe you spent years and years and years, and you're studying philosophy, and maybe you're studying history, and then you write your dissertation on something that Kant wrote, and there's like these premises, and you're just drawing this out, and you're really going deep into Kantian studies or something like that, right? And then somebody says, so what do you think, hey, philosopher, what do you think I should do in this business transaction? And they start talking about something like that's more philosophical, like business ethics.
Yeah.
Well, the thing is that this philosopher does have a certain level of expertise that maybe that person in that situation doesn't have, because they are a philosopher. But are they really an expert in business ethics? And are they an expert in that type of a business situation, and all of the types of psychological profiles that are coming into this? Because like maybe instead of this being an issue that really is coming down to business ethics, maybe it's really something that would be better addressed with a psychotherapist, because you really need to know about the psychology of what's going on and how people are interpreting things. And then like maybe the person who's asking for the advice, maybe they have a certain expertise in the history of that company and the history of people. And so then there's really a question on who has expertise.
Yeah, I want to add to that really because I've noticed that people will sometimes get an expertise. They don't have a degree, they don't have the sort of acknowledged expertise, but they've done kind of their own research and they actually know more about a particular part of a topic than a so-called expert. I was even thinking about this with our son Micah, that he watched a set of videos about infinity. And then when he and I were talking about infinity, and he's talking about super tasks and he's talking about things, and it's like, okay, right now it seems like he's actually more of an expert on this particular part of this topic than I am.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't say, oh, I've got a PhD in philosophy or whatever, so you need to listen to me. I mean, one of our first conversations, Mike and I, when he was beginning to philosophize, little tyke, and we talked about, we had a disagreement, philosophical disagreement about space.
Mm-hmm.
He said space was like a substance, and I said it was more like a relation between objects.
He has his mama's intuition.
Yeah, that was the conversation you and I had, and it was so funny because I remember asking him, I forget what he's like 5 years old, and I said, Micah, I disagree with you. Does the fact that I disagree with you make me less sure of your viewpoint? And he said no. He's like, no. And that's fine because maybe he's an expert by the light of his uncorrupted intuition. Maybe that could be. Now in that particular topic, I think that I had more considerations. He might still have been correct in his view in the end. But there are other topics. I mean, we've had this experience. I remember when we took our child to the doctor and we got to talking about some science, and there were certain scientific articles that I had read, peer-reviewed science, that the doctor wasn't aware of.
Exactly.
And so, well, am I an expert on this? I mean, not really. I don't have any degree on this particular topic that we were talking about. Does that mean that I have to just sort of take the expert's word for it? I guess that's the question you're asking. Like, what does it take to be an expert?
What does it mean to be an expert? Because
Yeah.
I mean, especially if you're talking about some particular question in the medical field, it's like, I mean, that doctor may have spent, half a class period talking about that subject, and that's it. Like, I mean, and then, they have their impressions and their experience just like you do. And then maybe they have, their other medical training that informs them about that, but who's to say that you couldn't have done like, lots of research, like, and you have been reading lots of peer-reviewed articles about that very topic so that you actually have more expertise on that particular thing than the doctor does, who's basically the expert trying to give you advice of what to do. And that,
That's
I mean,
possible.
That's
Yeah.
a question. I think that's a question that is important to really think about, because you have to step back before you even try, you get too entangled in the question, what do you do when the experts disagree? You have to ask yourself, well, what does it even mean to be an expert?
Yeah.
And then really what's at stake, right? What's at stake? Because, well, like you said, it's like, if you want to know what's true, well, then you'll want to kind of know like how to assign epistemic probabilities to things based upon what experts say.
Yeah. Like, how likely is this person's theory given that this expert says this?
Yeah. And then that's where, or you can be looking at it in terms of like, well, actually, this is calling into question right now. This very question that experts disagree on is calling into question this whole authority structure over here. And maybe in the past, I have associated with that authority structure and found safety within that authority structure. So if you start to pull apart this thing right here, And, you're just saying, well, we should be, we shouldn't have any prior assignment to, which one is going to be correct going into it, because we shouldn't favor one over the other. Well, then suddenly now it seems like there's this whole part of your life that's at stake, which is this safety that you've associated with being under this authority structure, because it's the authority structure that's
Yeah.
being threatened, right? Because if there's an authority structure and the authority structure is, let's just say it's rigid because it's built upon certain propositions or beliefs or behaviors or practices, then as soon as you pull apart one of the little legs out from under it, it topples, right? And maybe this explains why, if there are some Christians and they come across somebody like Bart Ehrman, and he's like, hey, you know what? I'm not even really sure if the resurrection happened. Or, like, hey, there's this other guy, Apollonius of Tiana or whatever, that,
Yeah. Well, Bart
apparently.
Ehrman himself, as a Christian, goes into graduate school and begins uncovering things that he never saw before, and then it sort of pulled out the kind of authoritative structure that I think he was under.
And maybe that's why they end up losing their faith.
In that
their whole faith.
particular authority
And,
structure.
and
Yeah. And I think
not
everybody
only
can
their
relate to
whole
losing your faith in something, right?
Well, and that's the thing, is like, not only like their whole faith in like Christianity, it's like they might even just become an atheist, because it's like they have to throw out that whole authority structure. Well, that authority structure included in it as one of the premises that God existed, right?
Uh-huh. It's part of that package. Right. That's right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, really kind of for any authority structure that includes something like theism, if that authority structure crumbles, then everything sort of within it comes into question, right? Especially if the reason that you believe the parts of the package was because the package was given to you in the safety of a community.
And if you're not a philosophical type, or if you're not looking into those topics for yourself so that you feel like you're becoming an expert, then what are you supposed to do except rely upon what the experts say? And if you just, happen to be within an authority structure, which most of us are, I mean, honestly,
Well, everybody is, right? I mean, everybody believes something based on what somebody says.
Right. Like even the authority of like science, or the authority of history, or the authority of, the whole legacy of, Western civilization, like if you're in the United States, or,
or the
like,
authority of you telling me, Josh, I'm over in the kitchen. Then, that's your testimony, right? I mean, and
there's
that's
all sorts
authority.
of authorities, and those structures, those authority structures can be based on different things.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting then to really then just think, given that people have different inclinations, and given that they have different motivations for finding out what's true, the very question of what do you do when experts disagree, it might be answered differently for different people. And I think that, really this question is the most applicable to those who would feel like it is part of their purpose or part of their natural instincts to look into things for themselves, and they just really want to know what's true, and that they are sort of willing to risk being, ostracized by that
I want to just affirm the value in that, that the value of that risk of allowing yourself to think outside of whatever boxes you might have started in, because that's how you're going to see more, I think.
Yeah, because I think that if you're not so inclined to be, really exploring very far beyond your boundaries, well, then I think that really, well, what do you do when experts disagree? Like, well, basically you hold on to the experts that you trust. And then, so basically there's a prescription of warfare for that.
Yeah.
Which is that you do character assassination, right? So the other side tries to undermine the character of the authority figures or of the authority structure and say, hey, like this isn't very reliable. You should get out of there. You should come over to mine.
Yeah.
Right. And
Yes.
then,
This is what it is, Rachel, is that this is where the debates get very interesting, because you can start to see that, oh, the reason that you're representing that view is because you're under this person's authority. And the way that I would discern that is that if every one of their reasons is removed, but they continue to carry the original system, and it wasn't just because of unknown reasons, but it's by appealing to these whatever their authorities are.
sorry, hold on 1 second.
Yeah. Rachel's gone. She's
I'm
back.
here.
Hi, I missed you.
I'm sorry.
I wasn't too bad.
I had my 2-year-old asking me for cars. So I told him to go ask his older sister.
So I wanted just to kind of share something with you. You might disagree with this, but this would be kind of my view. This would be kind of my view about my current view.
Your view.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we might disagree, and I don't know if we're experts on this at all. But this is just my experience, just from my experience, like kind of what to do when experts disagree. And kind of at the core of my view is it's almost like I just want to like affirm people in the leaning in to their own instincts. There was this study. Okay, so people are aware of I think it was out of Harvard, this study where it was about polarized beliefs. And they had a question, I think it was about capital punishment. And they gave
talking about that.
I'm going to keep sharing this with you.
I already know about that.
You know what I'm going to say about this part. So there was a study, and they had this question to the students: is capital punishment a good thing, or something like this? And then they gave arguments and evidence for and against an answer to the question. And they gave that to people who initially answered one way, and the same evidence people initially answered the other way. And after the two groups looked at the same evidence, they came away more polarized, more sure of their original position than they were initially. And then there are subsequent studies about how you can change that, where people look at the same evidence and they're actually less polarized. And a lot of it has to do with perspective taking. But what I was going to say, our kids might need our attention.
We have a 2-year-old who is very upset because he wants cars, and I think he wants particular.
He has cars.
He wants I think he wants the new cars that we got him yesterday. And I think that the older siblings don't understand that that's what he's asking for.
Okay.
Can you help Dylan find the new cars that we got him yesterday?
So here's the other study I was going to share. And it was about people's perception of their own success. So the first study might sort of display, you might think, irrationality. It might be sort of unfortunate that you look at the same evidence, but then people polarize further on the basis of the same evidence. But then there's possible solutions to that, like seeking to take the other person's perspective, intellectual humility, intellectual virtues, which you can practice. Then there was another study that kind of had a similar sort of unfortunate outcome, which is that it kind of shows and sort of highlights maybe our irrationality. And it was like a question about whether you thought that you were going to be more successful than your peers. And I could be wrong about this. I thought it was another one of those Harvard studies, but it was like asking the students, do you think you're going to be more successful than your peers? And that on average, most of them thought they would be more successful than their peers. And I think the takeaway from that, this again shows the irrationality of our thinking. But I looked at the primary source. I wanted to know that, speaking of wanting to see it for myself, I really wanted to know what was their data. And in the data, they also had an observation that people have defined success slightly differently people tended to define success according to their own strengths
into their own value system.
and their own value system. So that actually it could be that they were all correct, that they each one was more successful than everybody else on average relative to their own value system and their own strengths. Like, so maybe for one person to be successful means to make a lot of money, but then for another person, they would sort of measure success in terms of, let's say, having good relationships. And then maybe the reason they have those different definitions is because they have different strengths. And so then they're getting attuned to the instruments that will help them to achieve their own goals. And the way this relates to experts is I have this view that it's kind of an empowering view, and you might disagree with it, but I mean, it's just from my experience, this just seems true, which is that
trying to build up contention to like make it feel like we might disagree on something.
Yeah, because people want to see us fight. That's what they're waiting for.
They want to see us fight about it.
They're going to keep coming back to these episodes and we're like, when are they going to fight?
They want to see what we do when we disagree.
When we get mad at each other. Do we ever get mad? Do we ever fight and want to pull each other's hair out?
No, not like that.
So I'm building the tension for my view. So my view is that if you follow your own curiosity and you lean into your own strengths, so like for some people, their strength is to collect a lot of observations and have sort of a library of information in their mind. For other people, they're really good at actually sort of synthesizing lots and lots of experts. So it's like important for them to read lots of experts. And then for others, they're just like really good at sort of that a priori, like mathematics, like they just sort of follow the tracks of reason. And that's kind of their skill set. And it's what I want to say is like, follow your own skill set, and that will actually give you the most power to either be an expert or to evaluate the experts. And that will give you the most power to figure out what's true, which I guess maybe is kind of what I care about. But going back to what you're saying, Rachel, about the safety thing, I think that by having more power in your own search, by actually paying attention to your strengths, leaning into them, and doing almost like giving yourself permission to do the thing that kind of comes the most naturally to you, because that's probably the thing that will give you the most power to test things out. And for some people, that again might mean synthesizing what a lot of experts think. I've got friends, it seems like they've got this library mind where they have a good summary of kind of almost like an intellectual story of what the experts think. And then that story serves them. It actually helps them to get to truth, and to even see maybe which views are safer or more reliable than other views. And the result of this, I think, is that if you are under a system of authority that isn't serving you, that's more like controlling you, maybe keeping you from exploring past its boundaries, precisely because you are feeding its energy in some way, and it's not actually serving you, you're more likely to find that out more quickly if you lean into your own tools, your own strengths, your own powers. So I want to encourage you, Rachel, and anybody watching, and maybe myself as well, like give yourself permission to lean into your own strengths. You have this look like you're not so sure. You're like,
well, fine. I guess I just didn't know that we were just in the mode of like, oh, okay, well, we figured it out. Now we're gonna give you the advice of what to do.
As an authority, right?
I was still
trying to figure out
wanting to say a little bit more on some of the distinctions that could be made, and even just maybe to add to what you're saying, like what are some other things to do or to look for, or like if because what I did was, I mean, I set it up to you as like a question, like why are you even wanting to know what to do when experts disagree? That was kind of how I framed it, because it's like, well, to me, it has to do with your motivational structure.
Yeah.
So like, if your motivational structure is just to be safe, well, then you should probably just listen to what people are saying about like, what the character is of other people. But
But which people do you listen
that's
to?
the thing that's
That's
tricky.
my question.
That's the thing that's tricky is because if you only listen to your people
Yeah.
and then you just listen to what they say and project upon others, how do you know that that's true?
Well, how do you know which people are your people? Is it just the
How
ones
do
you
you,
start out with?
well, and that's the thing. I mean, I guess this is a natural process of, as you change, you kind of associate with different people, or maybe you don't change and you stay with the same people. Like, and if that's not your purpose, then it doesn't really matter, I guess. It's like, so whichever people you associate with,
Yeah.
then it's like you just keep your eyes open for who are good characters and who are bad characters, like according to what what you can perceive. So
Yeah.
I guess this warfare about, character assassination and all this stuff, maybe that's going to be very effective for you. Except that I would add this one caveat, which is that I guess, there's that famous saying that, a good tree produces good fruit, right? And if you're looking at somebody and somebody's saying like, hey, that person's a horrible person, look at that horrible, horrible
Mm-hmm.
person, you can't
Mm-hmm.
trust them. And then you're looking at that person, and from all that you can see, you just see good fruit, or you see like good things coming from them. Well, then that actually probably gives you more evidence, because what that does is it gives you evidence that the person who was making that accusation, that other person was bad, probably
Mm-hmm.
that's a reflection back upon that person who's making the accusation. Actually, probably they have some bad fruit, like they feel insecure, or they feel they're trying to hide something, or they feel jealous, or something's happening, so that they're trying to destroy somebody else who has good fruit, right? So you can
This is a
start,
difficult topic, right? Because you might think somebody has good fruit,
well, and
but
then
it's sort of manufactured, and
that's the thing where it's
there's
like,
deception
okay,
underneath.
you get into all the category of like, if you're listening inside your echo chamber, and then you
Yeah.
start to get disinformation, right? Because you're only talking with people who agree with you, or whatever it is, right? So that's why this isn't a solution, really. It's just a way of being. Here is how you practice
Mm-hmm.
finding what to do when the experts disagree. Is here's one way, is if you want to kind of associate with an authority structure that's going to keep you safe, well, to make sure that you're with the most safe people, you probably want to be with the people who are producing the best fruit. You probably don't want to be with the people who are producing bad fruit, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, maybe you do, maybe that's what you like, but I mean, I'm just assuming that most people would like to be around the sort of good fruit, where good fruit means that it's multiplying, it's building up, it's leading
It's
toward
encouraging.
leading toward love and unity, it's leading toward compassion.
Peace.
Yeah, it's leading toward peace, it's leading toward edification of each other, it's leading toward just more harmony and flourishing altogether, right?
Yeah. And it
So
tastes good. Yeah, because I was
it's
thinking
good.
it's like somebody can show you a piece of fruit and it can look good on the outside, but when you taste it, you might find bruises in there, or you might find, oh, this tastes really good, right? And there is something about that. I know what you're saying. Like there are people that when I'm with them, there's a kind of energy, there's a resonance, and it's like I'm sort of I'm tasting their fruit, their energy, and I can sort of feel if there's that love and that
And
positive
then that
energy.
you can just start to pay attention, like,
Mm-hmm.
hey, like if I'm around somebody who actually is because if you're under an authority structure, you'll start to notice that the people who are also under that authority structure will tend to resemble the similar fruit as the ones at the top.
Yeah.
They tend to. It's not a perfect correlation, so that's where you can really get thrown off, because you can have a few bad apples like under the same tree, but that
Yeah.
doesn't necessarily mean that the tree is a bad tree, right?
Yeah.
Or you could have a really bad tree, but you somehow get some good ones in there, and they just
Yeah.
happen, right?
I like
So
this. Can I just say something? I love this metaphor. If you have a huge tree, so think of a leader who has huge influence. Because the tree is so huge, it could be that 0.001% of the fruit is bad, but because they're so huge and so influential, if there's an opposing tree, so an opposing leader and now there's a kind of like warfare against each other. If the opposing tree wants to destroy the high impact influencer, they can find that 0.001% of bad fruit and highlight it. and
Yeah.
sort of describe this, sort of characterizes the whole thing. Um, so then it can become complicated in that way.
Yeah. So basically what this is not a fail safe, because basically what you need to do is you need to learn how to exercise discernment. And
Mhm.
how do you do that? Well, you just have to have experience in life. You just have to keep doing it over and over again. And then what you discover, like for example, if you're saying, hey, like, I'll let you use my phone, like, hey, and then you find out that they're using your phone to do drug deals and stuff like that, right?
You're talking about me right now.
Talking about you right now. And you're like,
I
oh,
did that. I gave somebody my phone. We were helping him out,
yeah.
and
So
it didn't
anyway,
really help.
yeah. So then you end up just, if you are giving your energy or giving your resources or your alliance, your support toward someone who's producing bad fruit, well, you're going to start to realize, if you don't like bad fruit, you're going to start to realize that by aligning and by supporting that person who's
And copying and
fruit,
imitating. Yeah.
then it's going to multiply bad fruit.
Mhm.
And so if you like good fruit, then you would probably want to reevaluate whether you have that alliance, right? So that's just discernment. So you can do that on a personal level, and you can do that on the level of authority structures, right? Now, authority structures are very difficult, because what do you do if there's two different authority structures and it looks like, well, it's either a choice between A or B?
Mhm.
And what if that's a false dichotomy? What if it's not just that there's a choice between A or B? It's just that these happen to be the two bullies that came up, and they're like, hey, well, either he's going to steal your lunch money, or, I'm going to.
Yeah,
You
or
have to
maybe
decide.
their representatives are feeling safe by these different leaders, and they perceive them as irreconcilable.
Yeah, that's also another scenario where it's like you think that it's A versus B,
Yeah.
but what if it's just like, uh, Paul talking about, the people in the early church saying, well, I follow Cephas, I follow Apollos, and just, arguing over who they follow.
Mm-hmm.
And then, Paul is making the comment, well, it doesn't really matter who you follow. You just, basically, if you're just following after God or following after good, then it doesn't really matter like which banner you're falling under,
Mm-hmm.
because it's just a different style of producing, in a sense, in this analogy, is producing good fruit. It doesn't really matter whether it's A or B. And so then it's like there could be someone who sets it up like it's a warfare, again, like it's a false dichotomy. You have to choose either A or B.
Yeah.
What if it could be both? Like both are actually good structures.
Yeah. So what do you think about like eating fruit from different trees and different experts? Um, Even if those experts and their followers oppose each other. We could think in terms of politics, in terms of religion, in terms of any of the subjects that fire people up, and you can pick leaders that are across these fences, on different sides of these fences, and the followers say, you can't have that person's fruit, you can't have that person's fruit. And then let's say you start kind of picking from the different trees, and you might call that what's that term? Syncretism, that's the term. Syncretism. Is syncretism good or is it bad?
I don't think you can just have one answer to that question, because everybody, like what I was saying, it has to do with discernment.
Yeah.
So if you're going around and picking up rotten fruit from people, well, it doesn't matter how syncretistic you are, you're picking up rotten fruit. So it's like, okay. So I really think that there is something really prior to this whole conversation, is realizing that you have the ability to make a choice, and even that you have a responsibility
Mm-hmm.
to choose, where am I aligning myself, and where am I giving my energy, and am I seeing something that's kind of inconsistent with something, like maybe I don't really like that, like, but am I just kind of still continuing to just be part of that system and empower that thing that I don't really like?
Mm-hmm.
And then like you have to ask yourself, well, how do I, maybe it's kind of like, well, this is the lesser of two evils, like I better empower this one so that that other evil one doesn't take over, or
Mm-hmm.
like, and then I would just say, like, everyone has to make their own decisions about what they're doing. But to really just pay attention internally,
Yeah.
is this something that I am going to feel proud of to contribute toward? And I've been really feeling convicted about this actually, like, hey, you know what? Are there some like little restaurants or some little stores, or like, are there people who are doing these sort of, unique things that like I kind of appreciate what they're doing, and maybe I can like actually give them some money or buy their
Support them.
products
Yeah.
instead of just having this, admiration from a distance. Maybe I can do something to support them,
Hmm.
you know, and it's a matter of degree, right? Because we already do that, right? But
Yeah.
just
Well,
it's a
and that
matter of
involves paying attention to whether they're aligned with good fruit, is what I hear you saying.
hmm
Right. And then, so this is very interesting to me, but this is something we've been talking about probably the last 5 years or so, and it's kind of been intensifying in the last couple years. This sort of theme in our conversations about authority and about recognizing your own authority and, as you said, responsibility to discern things, right? Because if I say I can't discern, so this authority has to discern for me,
hmm
then how could I, in principle, even know that this authority is a good one unless I'm discerning that it is? Do you see? I mean, and we've talked around this quite a bit, but I feel like it comes up right here in the conversation because it's related to what you're saying about discerning between different authorities. And if you pick up some fruit from this one and then some other fruit from this one, that's only possible if you're recognizing that you yourself actually have authority
yeah.
yourself.
And you're going to have better discernment if you better discern yourself. Am I actually doing something right now that's in line with my values and my aspirations and my integrity? Or am I actually like, breaking my own word to myself? Am I kind of living a contradiction? Am I
Mm-hmm.
kind of compromising my values that I would look up to and think that, oh, like this is so great, but then I'm not doing it. I'm not living it out in my life,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because if you're
Are you
doing that to
consistent?
yourself,
Yeah.
if you're doing that to yourself, then you're undermining your own authority. And when you're undermining
Mm-hmm.
your own authority, how are you supposed to properly discern outside authorities?
Yeah. That's the link right there, because I think sometimes it's easy to lose sight of this connection between the external authority and your own. Like, you can only discern that the external being or person or whatever, being or person, like these are different. You can only discern that this external source is reputable, has some kind of authority, or is reliable if you are discerning it, which means you're sort of implicitly relying on your own authority to discern authority.
And then how do you figure out like what's something that you feel like is like something that is good, good. We use these moralizing terms like this is good and this is bad, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you have to really ask like what does good and bad mean? Right? Like, because there's this Bible verse that says like in the last days they will call evil good and good evil, right?
Right,
And
right,
people
right.
take that verse and they throw it
And
all
they apply
around,
it to all those other people who are calling
and
evil
they
good and good
apply it
evil.
to other people who have different
Mm-hmm.
ideas than they do, right? And they're like, oh, look, see, they're just calling evil good and good evil, right?
And we're not calling what they're doing evil right now.
I'm just saying that this is just something that somebody does. It's an
Yeah.
observation. Okay.
Yeah.
So, and I can't actually say whether that's the right or the wrong. Again, moralize it and say it's right or wrong. I can't say anything about that because I'm using a hypothetical case. Okay. So, really, I think what I'm pointing out is that, you have to really start to define your terms more carefully, because if you're talking about good, well, you might have a certain idea of what good is, but is that really good?
Yeah.
And how do you know? Well, you have to have some sort of acquaintance with goodness, according to what it means for you. So for
Mm-hmm.
example, if I experience something that is creating more health in my body, let's say I was sick and then like I put a couple drops of orange oil in my water, and I did that for a couple days, and let's say that like made my sore throat go away or something, like then I might call that good, right? And then I might then associate orange oil with good, right?
Yeah.
Well, what if somebody else like puts some orange oil on them and then they break out into hives or something? Well, then they might associate orange oil with bad, right? Because it led to a bad result. Well, there's some fundamental notion of good and bad as related to experience.
To the experience itself. Yeah.
Right. So then you can just broaden out and take a perception in terms of like, the snapshot of like all of humanity. You say like, well, what's good? Well, it seems like generally what would be good would be things that would lead toward happiness, flourishing, like, harmonious sorts of systems and interactions, more loving, more connection, more of these sorts of things that we generally all appreciate and acknowledge as things that improve our lives, more health, more, more abundance, more beauty, more like, and then the idea is that, well, maybe there are some people who actually don't, like, maybe they'll take a certain premise and they'll say, well, actually, like this premise right here, or this quality right here, I actually don't think that serves me. I actually don't like that. Right. So then we start to have like a different concept of like what's like good for humanity. Right.
Yeah.
And so then it really has to do with, and also
because you're kind of objectifying your experience
onto everybody else,
onto an object maybe that caused that experience, even though that object gives other people different experiences.
Hold on 1 second. Hey, Micah, can you guys play outside for a few more minutes until I'm done talking to or be very quiet? Okay, thank you. So it's just interesting because then I'm just thinking about it in terms of if you have two people and they're trying to say, well, this is like, we need to make a decision on behalf of like the whole collective of everyone, like everyone in this region, we need to make a decision that's going to affect all of them, right? And this is for the good of humanity, right? Well, the idea of this is for the good of humanity, like there's two things that are tricky about that. Because one is what we were just talking about as good being very much connected to subjects. Like, what does this subject perceive to be good? But the other one has to do with actually like knowledge or wisdom. So like actually what I perceive is good will actually be achieved if we enact like X or if we adopt X, right?
Yeah.
And that I actually have enough knowledge and perception and wisdom to actually see that does lead to that outcome. Because somebody could actually desire a good outcome that actually like let's just say that we're trying to make a decision for our collective, Josh and Rachel, right? And we're just saying like, okay, like what would be a good decision to make right now in this moment, right? And so let's just say that I propose that we should do X. Like let's just say we're talking about like going to a restaurant or something. And let's just say that in my value system is let's just remove it from reality for a minute. So my value system is that well, the best, like the good outcome will be to have very expensive, exquisite food, because that's going to contribute to our significance. And that's going to, give us a boost of our morale. Okay. So let's just say that is my decision making matrix. And then let's just say that
I disagree.
Josh, let's just say that Josh disagrees. Actually,
I want ice cream.
Go for quantity of food.
That's right.
Yeah, let's just say, like, I want to have more quantity of food. Of course, we're removing this from reality, right? So,
oh yeah, this is purely hypothetical.
This is purely hypothetical.
We'll do quantity and forget quality, right? And actually, if it's less healthy but tasty.
Yeah. So
that'd be nice.
So I'm gonna go for the more exquisite, more expensive, maybe higher quality food that's more beautifully presented, but then as a result, it has less quantity, right? And then maybe you're going to go for the food. You're going to say, it's the best for us. It's the good decision. It's going to lead to the good of our
Collective.
the
Yes.
collective Josh and Rachel.
Yes.
For us
Which has a name. All right. The name of us, just, if the audience is watching this, well, how could an audience not be watching this? By definition, okay. Marie is the combination of us. That's the name. So if we ever refer to Marie, that's the mereological sum of Josh and Rachel.
So let's just say that the mereological sum of Josh and Rachel, we're trying to evaluate whether it's good for that collective to have more exquisite but higher cost quality food, or to have a greater quantity of food that's tasty that costs less.
That's right.
Less of a less money out of our budget. And we could just take this really to extremes, we could take it to extremes, right? But so if we're actually considering
trying to make a decision,
question, let's just say that I am saying, okay, we're saying, Josh, you're saying, well, Rachel, like, let's make a decision about our collective good, about where we should go to eat. And then I'm saying, oh, it will be good to eat at JMK Nippons, whatever. Okay. So just funny. Okay. Or like this restaurant in the ground floor of this Boston Plaza hotel or whatever, like whatever you want to choose. Right.
And then this is going to come down to like, who can make the decision? Is that where you're going?
No. So let's just say that I make a decision.
Okay.
And let's just say I'm going to choose, let's just say this restaurant on the ground floor of this hotel in Boston, where it's like $150 a plate, right? We could go to an even more exquisite place than that if we want to, but I wouldn't know the names off the top of my head because we actually don't eat like that. So anyway, so let's just say that I think that this is for our collective good that we go and eat at this restaurant. Okay. So
Rachel, that that example is very nice and hypothetical and elaborate, but just last night we had a decision about whether we were going to stop by McDonald's, which you said violated ethical constraints in your soul. But I and the kids were like, get us some French fries.
I know.
So anyway, it creates a similar dilemma, right? Because somebody's going to decide what to do on behalf of the collective.
Then I can then let's just say that then I decide that we're going to go to this exquisite restaurant, right? And then Josh says, well, I don't know if that's good for us, right? Once we arrive, it's a surprise. Like I made the decision, like we arrive and he's like, oh man, I don't know if this is good for our collective, because maybe Josh is extra hungry and he doesn't want to spend $1,000 on food that night, right? Like something like that, right? We can say maybe in that scenario, maybe I'm actually making a decision that is actually, according to my knowledge and wisdom, connecting us to an outcome that I actually perceive to be good. And it actually is leading to a track that does lead there.
That is good. Yeah.
Now let's just say that instead what happens is we're walking in downtown, I don't know, we can pick different cities, that we're walking in downtown San Diego. Okay. We're walking in downtown San Diego or downtown New York, whatever, East Coast, West Coast, it doesn't matter. And let's just say that Josh says, oh, look, there's a buffet. Let's go in and eat here. I think this will be good for our collective. Okay. So now Josh has an idea of what's good for our collective, right? But let's say that when we go into this buffet, we have no idea that this buffet is like, this very, very high-end buffet where they charge you per like noodle that you put on your plate or something like that, right? Something very like unusual, right? So we have no idea that we're racking up like a $15,000 bill, like for our meal. But Josh, given his perception of like, I want to have the flexibility to have some more quantity, right? Then he would see, oh, buffet, like I associate that with quantity of
Mhm.
food, tasty food. And so like, let's go here. But then actually what ends up happening as the result is that it's actually not the result that he was thinking in
Yeah.
the values. Like maybe like your value system was saying it would be good to have tasty food and a low budget, right? But
Yeah.
let's
So
just
it
say you
doesn't
didn't,
even give me what I want according to my own
because
value system.
according to your own values, right? So
Yeah.
so there's two different
Yeah. Cases.
constraints. Yeah, there's one which is like what is good,
Yeah.
and then there's two of how to achieve what you think is good.
Right. 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 Yep.
And so like it's very interesting then, because I think that the more that you can make these distinctions, the more that you'll start to realize that when the experts are disagreeing, so many times they're disagreeing on so many different levels that
Yes.
it's really, really hard to
Sometimes
just,
it's over what is good, and sometimes it's over the calculation of how to achieve it.
yes.
For
And
example,
sometimes,
sometimes people have the same goods they're after, but they have different calculations over how to achieve it. But sometimes that's not what's happening.
and sometimes they have to do with, actually they have some motivational structure that perhaps somebody says, hey, you know what, like, don't trust that person. Like they're going to slam their character because, hey, actually, you don't know that they're actually just funneling money off of you right now,
Mm-hmm.
telling you these things, right? And then that's like another dimension, right? Like
Yeah.
whether the person's being authentic and maybe if you use the frame of service to others versus service to self or whatever,
That
sort
it
of
takes
thing.
discernment to sort of detect that, which I think kind of what you're saying is it takes experience and then practice and like paying attention to that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think that, when you're talking about the question of, so what do you do when experts disagree? I think we can see now that there are lots of very complicated issues that can all go in. It's not just a simple decision matrix. It's not like,
Yeah.
oh, here's one prescribe all pill, you know.
This, by the way, Rachel, what you're saying here, this point you're landing on, is something that the experts on disagreement, or at least those who work in this field, um, this seems to be a common result of their work. When I've talked with them and I would ask them, well, how do you do it? And they would say, there's many tools and there are many cases. And so there's not like one rule that covers all the cases. There's different types of disagreement. And so you're going to want to pay attention to those different types in order to navigate that. Yeah.
Yeah. So then basically I think the very, very interesting, I think, the final case that I want to really consider and hone in on is the case of the person who would be, I think, the most aligned with our energy, which would be the explorer.
Mm-hmm.
So what does the explorer do when the explorer actually doesn't want it, the explorer isn't sufficient to just find safety in an authority structure? The explorer actually wants to go out into the world and find out what's true. The explorer wants to compare and contrast and wants to find the strengths and the weaknesses. And the explorer wants to get outside of the echo chamber, right? So people can
Outside
be,
the caves into the meadow.
yes. So explorers can be explorers in one sort of a subject area and
Yeah.
not explorers in others, right?
Yeah.
So this is where it's tricky distinctions too, right? Because somebody can be a really high level explorer over here, but then over here they seek safety and then they're just like very tribal
Mm-hmm.
in this other respect, right? So let's just say that for the person in the topic that they want to be an explorer, so then what do they do when they come across experts that disagree?
Mm-hmm.
And this is where I found it very interesting to consider just what does it really mean to come across experts that disagree, and even when you're challenging your own beliefs, like what does that really mean? What is that phenomenon?
Mm-hmm.
Because like for example, when I would be talking with people, what I would notice is that so often they would identify themselves as like, I am a physicalist, or I am a whatever. They fill in the blank with some sort of identifying label,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then what that then does is it basically puts a fence around their authority structure and says, I'm not questioning this authority structure. I'm actually just speaking from inside this authority structure, right? So in that frame, it's really difficult to then evaluate truth claims outside the authority structure. So as an explorer, then it seems like what I've discovered personally helpful is to just think about a proposition and then think about, what do people say for that proposition, against that proposition? What are neighboring propositions? And then I start to, like, we've used this term before, like the idea landscape.
Uh-huh.
It's like
Yeah.
we basically start to paint this idea landscape, and it becomes more of a network of if then. So if, so and so is right, and what they're saying about this ends up being correct, then this would follow
Mm-hmm.
from that, right? If so and so is right, and then what they are saying is matching onto this, then this would follow, right? So then what you start to see is, you start to see all of these webs of connection
Mm-hmm. And it's
come
not that
out.
you don't see any nodes. It's just that there's a lot of if thens that
There's a lot of
you
if
don't have to
then.
identify all the nodes in order to identify if thens.
And then what ends up happening is you end up having a probability distribution in your
Mm-hmm.
mind, given all of these different considerations, like given, whether you perceive that that person really is an expert in that area, or whether they're sort of overreaching, right? What their character is, whether they're producing good fruit, right? Um, Different characteristics of how they're going about their exploration. Like, are they using certain tools? Are they not using certain tools? And these other things about, do you perceive that what they're saying is actually tracking with other things that you perceive already to be true for other reasons? Do you perceive that when they actually enact, or when their propositions are carried out, that it actually leads to the result that they say that should result? Like,
Mm-hmm.
there's all of these different parameters, right? You start to pay attention to these things,
Yeah.
then that starts to assign the probabilities higher or lower. And so then what I've discovered is that so many of my beliefs, I wouldn't really even have beliefs. I would have leanings. I would kind of
Right.
lean toward, well, it seems like maybe this is true. And then I would have some things that I would have more robust evidence, because the evidence is coming from lots of different points on my web,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then that actually becomes then more fortified.
Yeah.
But then there are other things where I don't have as much evidence around that thing, or maybe I have more reasons to question that. And so then what happens is, then that I hold loosely. It's like, oh, I just
Mm-hmm.
kind of lean maybe toward this direction. And
Yeah.
then many times what happens is, then I end up having a whole different way of interpreting the question.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of it being according to one line of debate where, well, there's this side and then there's this side. It's like I end up seeing different dimensions of the question, so that I don't see it so much like this side versus this side anymore. I
Mm-hmm.
see it more as, I see that there are these points being made over
Yeah.
here and these points being made over here. And I can actually see the validity of all those points. And how do those mesh together? Like, how
Yeah.
do they actually build like a different frame of understanding
You might
than
be
what
able
is
to see
currently
some
being
ways to
debated?
synthesize, and you might even see that some synthesizing is more likely in your mind than other ways. And you're not coming down and saying, "Oh, it's just this side black or this side white." You're in that explorer of like expanding your understanding, expanding your consciousness, I think, is what I hear you saying.
Well, yeah, I mean, it seems like there's something very interesting about just coming across more perspectives. And then, kind of like what we were talking about earlier this morning before we came on this video, about some people who are experts, like they spend 40 years, 50 years of their life trying to uncover something and
Yeah.
maybe even writing books or doing work,
Right.
like spending their whole life working on things. But then somehow, either on a personal level or on a tribal level or on a societal level, basically those people are considered fringe. And so,
Relative to other people. And so
so
you
then
might
their
you might
life's
never know
work,
about them.
their
Yeah.
life's work is just either ignored or just like very like, oh, frowned upon, like, oh, like that's just like worth nothing, right? And it's interesting because then it's it's like, what do you do when you find that there are experts debating this and this, and those are the acceptable experts,
Yeah.
but then there are other experts who are over here on the side, and maybe they've even, looked into these topics to even greater lengths. And maybe they're less invested in a certain outcome because they're not part of an authority structure, right? Because a lot of times these debates, these really hard conflicts, are motivated by power struggles
Mm-hmm.
of authority structures butting heads, right? So if there's somebody who's kind of relegated to the edges, they might not have as much motivation to come up with one perspective or another.
Mm-hmm.
And then, but at the same time, their whole expertise, their whole life's work could just be easily discounted by a sneer, by
Yeah.
some mockery,
Right.
right? And so that, like, that's very interesting then to think about that as an explorer, because you
Mm-hmm.
might actually discover that as you begin to really respect people for their expertise, you might actually find people to be experts that you wouldn't have ever thought were experts,
Mm-hmm.
because somebody else told you that, well, they're not an expert, that doesn't count,
Yeah.
right?
Experts relative to something very specific. And you might be able to find some gold nuggets in their work. Even if you don't sort of receive all of it, you might discover those gold nuggets by having kind of your eyes open to people who might be otherwise kind of barred from kind of what you're allowed to even explore, I
Yeah,
think.
what you're
Yeah.
allowed to
Yeah.
explore, right? I mean, that's a really big deal because so many times I think it really does come back down to authority structures sometimes bumping into one another, and then the phenomenon of the false dichotomy. Well, it's either this or this. And sometimes maybe those authority structures bumping up against one another actually create that false dichotomy, and that it might not actually be, reality might not actually be um, what it looks like, given the mainstream
Mm-hmm.
debates.
Yeah, I know
And
what you
so then
mean. It's
as
almost like there's a sort of psychological map of almost like what's allowed, what you can think about. And the map is defined by sort of like the current landscape of human consciousness.
the
But
current
reality, the
acceptable,
landscape of actual reality may be removed
right?
from the landscape of acceptable beliefs.
Well, and there's a difference, because people might say, well, what about the flat earthers? What about the flat earthers? Like, they're just out of touch. Like, they want to see things for themselves, but they're just out of touch with science, you know? And then it's like, well, then they kind of get pushed to the edges um, well, we just mock their view because it's so ridiculous, right? But it's like, what if instead you say, hey, you know what? They're actually detecting something. Hey, kids. Hey.
Hey,
Sorry,
Rachel,
it's
we
getting
have a lot
loud.
of pieces on the table, and I would love to continue exploring this. Maybe we can have a sort of final point on the flat Earth,
Well,
like
yeah, yeah,
drawing that
yeah.
out.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. So what I was just gonna say is that the flat earthers, you might say, hey, you know what? Like, I'm just gonna mock anybody who starts to go off onto the flat Earth track, because it goes against everything we know. Which basically that is signaling our current scientific model in Western society. Like, that's the authority structure that we're under, right? Hey, quiet, please. And what we could fail to realize is that there are some people who see through the fact that there's an authority structure controlling people's minds into a certain narrative, that then they're saying, hey, like, let's press against that. Right. And so by so quickly dismissing, and by the way, I don't believe the earth is flat. Right. Okay. So just
Yeah,
to clarify,
your goal isn't to make an argument
my
for
my goal
that.
is not to make an argument
You're
for
just
that
showing something
position,
we can all relate to. We can all relate to this experience
but
of
the
certain
idea is
views being
that
sort of off limits. Like
if
those
there's a
are,
view, if there's a view that's so quickly dismissed as, oh, that's just ridiculous, we can actually very quickly skim over a real jewel or a gem that somebody who has that view has picked up on. And
yeah.
that's what caused them to go on to that track.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, I think that if we really choose to respect every person as they are an expert in something, like every single person invests their life in something. And so for that reason, everybody is an expert in something.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so it might not be a predefined category. It might not be something that we can just standardize and give certificates about. But it does seem like if we can give more respect and honor to every person and say, hey, you know what? I consider you an expert. I consider that there's something that you have that I could learn from. Then we might, as explorers, and then this is who I'm talking to right now, as I'm talking to explorers, we might, as explorers, find more treasures and more pieces to put into our own puzzle than we would have otherwise.
I love that. That speaks my heart to my heart, speaks to my heart as an explorer, because yeah, I can relate to that. Finding treasures in places that are kind of unexpected. And yeah, I think that's a nice point to land on. So, like I said, I would love to keep talking about this with you. Maybe we can do another episode about kind of how to navigate disagreement. But for now, it's great to see you.
Or a related topic.
Yeah,
Doesn't
that
have to
sounds
be
great.
that topic. It could be related. Yeah.
Sounds great. All right.
All
Talk to you
right.
later.
All
Bye.
right. Bye.